There is a lesson most men learn far too late, and by the time they understand it, they've already paid the price. It isn't a lack of love that costs them respect. It isn't a lack of effort. It's the moment they stop protecting their standards. Most men believe respect comes from being understanding, patient, and available. But the truth is much colder than that. Respect is not negotiated. It is demonstrated. It is built every time you refuse to abandon yourself just to keep someone else comfortable. And women notice that far more than men realize. They pay attention to what you tolerate. They watch what you excuse. They observe the moments when you betray your own principles just to avoid conflict. That's where attraction quietly begins to fade. Today, we're talking about the first boundary every man must master if he wants genuine respect in his relationships. Not control. Not manipulation. Respect. And once you understand this principle, you'll start seeing every interaction differently. If you're committed to becoming a man who stands firm when others fold, comment below, "I choose respect." Because the first boundary changes everything. Never reward disrespect. Simple words, difficult practice. Most men hear that advice and immediately think about obvious insults or arguments. But disrespect rarely arrives wearing a warning sign. It slips in quietly, a sarcastic comment disguised as a joke. A pattern of being ignored, a habit of dismissing your thoughts whenever they become inconvenient. Tiny moments that seem harmless on their own, but over time begin to erode something far more valuable than the relationship itself, your self-respect. The dangerous part is that many men don't recognize it while it's happening. They explain it away. "She's just having a bad day. She didn't mean it. It's not worth making a big deal out of." And little by little, they train people to believe there are no consequences for crossing their boundaries. The shift is subtle. At first, she admires your patience. Then she begins expecting it. Eventually, she starts taking it for granted. And that's when the dynamic changes. Because the moment someone realizes they can repeatedly violate your standards without losing access to you, your value begins to drop in their eyes. Not because they're evil, not because they're trying to hurt you, because human nature respects what has limits. Think about it. If every door is always open, nobody appreciates entering. If something can never be lost, it stops feeling valuable. The same principle applies to relationships. A woman doesn't feel secure with a man who accepts everything. She feels secure with a man who knows exactly where his line is and refuses to move it. That's what strength looks like. Not anger, not dominance, not shouting, clarity. The ability to calmly say, "That behavior isn't acceptable," and mean it. Most men make the mistake of thinking boundaries require confrontation. They don't. In fact, the strongest boundaries are often the quietest. You don't need a speech. You don't need an argument. You don't need to convince anyone. You simply decide what you will and will not tolerate. Then you act accordingly. When she interrupts you constantly, notice it. When she mocks your goals, notice it. When she intentionally pushes your buttons just to see your reaction, notice it. These moments matter more than most men think. Every repeated act of disrespect is asking a silent question. How much of yourself are you willing to sacrifice to keep me here? And your response determines everything. The strongest answer is never emotional, it's behavioral. You address it once, directly, calmly, without resentment, without drama. Then you watch. Because words reveal intentions, but actions reveal character. If the behavior changes, you've learned something valuable. If it doesn't, you've learned something even more valuable. And that's where most men face their greatest challenge, not setting the boundary, enforcing it. Because attachment has a way of making weakness sound reasonable. Suddenly your mind starts negotiating. Maybe I should give it another chance. Maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe things will improve on their own. But every time you ignore your standards, you pay for temporary comfort with long-term self-respect. The cost is always higher than it appears. Which raises a difficult question. How does a man stay firm when emotions are pulling him in the opposite direction? How do you hold the line when she's the person you think about every day? The answer has less to do with her than you might imagine. And it begins with a realization that most men spend years avoiding. And that realization changes everything. Because the moment you stop making another person the center of your emotional world, you begin reclaiming something most men lose without ever noticing. Your peace. Not the kind of peace people talk about online. Not temporary comfort. Not distraction. Real peace. The kind that allows a man to sit alone with his thoughts and feel no urgency to escape them. Most men spend years chasing respect while neglecting the very thing that creates it. Inner stability. They wake up reacting to notifications, reacting to criticism, reacting to moods, expectations, and demands that never seem to end. Little by little, they become prisoners of everyone else's priorities. And the tragedy is, they call it responsibility. But there is a difference between being responsible and being available to chaos. One builds a man, the other drains him. A man without peace becomes easy to control because everything around him has access to his emotions. One difficult conversation ruins his day. One delayed text destroys his focus. One unexpected setback sends him spiraling. His world is always being managed by something outside of himself. And people feel that. Women feel it too. Not because they're analyzing every detail, but because energy leaves clues. When your attention is scattered, your presence weakens. When your schedule bends for every distraction, your priorities become unclear. When your emotions are constantly pulled in different directions, people stop seeing you as someone with direction and start seeing you as someone looking for one. That is why peace must be protected. Not occasionally, relentlessly. Every unnecessary argument costs something. Every toxic relationship costs something. Every habit that keeps you distracted costs something. The price is rarely visible at first, which is exactly why so many men keep paying it. Ask yourself a simple question. What in your life consistently steals your focus? Who leaves you feeling exhausted every time you interact with them? What activities consume your attention but never improve your future? The answers reveal more than you think, because peace isn't found, it's created. It's built through decisions. The decision to stop explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. The decision to stop entertaining drama disguised as connection. The decision to stop giving unlimited access to people who contribute nothing but confusion. Many men are afraid to make these decisions because they're worried about how others will react. But that fear is exactly what keeps them trapped. The truth is, when you start protecting your peace, some people will call you distant, others will call you cold, a few will accuse you of changing. They're right, you did change. You stopped volunteering your energy to people who never respected its value, and suddenly things begin shifting. Your thoughts become clearer, your decisions become stronger, your reactions become slower and more intentional. You no longer feel compelled to prove yourself. You no longer feel responsible for fixing everyone else's emotions. You stop carrying burdens that were never yours to carry. That's when something unexpected happens. The very people who once overlooked you begin paying attention, because calm has a presence that chaos can never imitate. The man who remains centered when others panic immediately stands out. The man who doesn't rush to defend himself creates curiosity. The man who refuses to abandon his purpose for temporary validation becomes difficult to ignore. And nowhere is this more visible than in relationships. Sometimes emotional tension appears for one simple reason. Someone is trying to discover where your center is, not through your words, through your reactions. When pressure arrives, do you fold? When emotions rise, do you lose control? When uncertainty appears, do you abandon your direction? Those moments reveal far more than any conversation ever could. And if your peace remains intact, something remarkable happens. You stop needing outcomes. You stop chasing reassurance. You stop trying to force people to stay. Because you understand that losing yourself is far more expensive than losing anyone else. That's why peace becomes non-negotiable. Once you've built it, you guard it. Once you've experienced it, you stop trading it away. And from that place of stability, another lesson emerges, one that most men misunderstand completely. Because protecting your peace doesn't mean revealing every thought inside your mind. In fact, many men destroy attraction by doing exactly that. They assume complete openness automatically creates deeper connection. But human nature doesn't work that way. There is a difference between honesty and overexposure, a difference between vulnerability and emotional dumping, a difference between sharing your truth and handing someone unrestricted access to every insecurity, fear, and unresolved wound you carry. The strongest men understand this instinctively. They are not secretive. They are selective. They don't reveal everything immediately because they understand that depth loses its value when it's offered without discernment. Think about the people who leave the strongest impression on you. Rarely are they the ones who talk endlessly about themselves. They're the ones who reveal themselves gradually, the ones whose actions speak before their explanations do, the ones who leave you curious. And curiosity is powerful, because the moment everything becomes predictable, attention begins to fade, which raises an uncomfortable question that most men never ask themselves. When you share every fear, every doubt, every emotional struggle the moment you feel it, are you creating connection? Or are you quietly giving away the very mystery that made people want to understand you in the first place? And that is where most men discover the next level. Not in what they reveal, not in what they possess, but in what they refuse to surrender when pressure arrives. Because the fourth boundary is one of the rarest qualities you'll ever witness in a man. Emotional composure. Most people think strength is about intensity. It's not. Anyone can explode. Anyone can react. Anyone can lose control for a moment. Real strength appears in the space between what happens to you and what you choose to do about it. That's where character lives. You've seen the opposite before. One unexpected comment ruins a man's entire day. One moment of rejection sends him chasing answers. One shift in a woman's behavior turns him into someone he barely recognizes. His emotions become the steering wheel, and every reaction pushes him further away from the man he wants to become. The problem isn't feeling. The problem is obedience. Too many men obey every emotion the second it arrives. They feel anger and immediately speak. They feel fear and immediately retreat. They feel uncertainty and immediately seek reassurance. And because of that, they never develop the ability to remain grounded when life inevitably tests them. But a man with emotional discipline operates differently. He notices the feeling, he acknowledges it, then he decides whether it deserves action. That pause changes everything, because when you stop reacting automatically, you begin seeing clearly. You hear what people actually mean instead of what your emotions assume they mean. You stop chasing explanations. You stop defending yourself to those determined to misunderstand you. You stop treating every challenge as a personal attack. And something remarkable happens. People lose the ability to control you. The individuals who once relied on provoking you become frustrated. The situations that once consumed your attention lose their grip. The drama that once felt urgent suddenly feels small, not because you've become cold, because you've become centered. There's a quiet confidence that develops when you realize not every battle deserves your energy, not every criticism deserves your response, not every invitation deserves your presence. You begin moving differently, more deliberately, more patiently, more powerfully. And when a woman notices that your emotions aren't available for manipulation, she sees something rare: consistency. She sees a man whose direction isn't determined by his mood. A man whose foundation remains intact regardless of what happens around him. And trust grows in places where stability exists. But emotional mastery alone isn't enough. Because eventually, life asks a bigger question. What are you willing to leave behind in order to remain loyal to yourself? That's where the fifth boundary appears. The willingness to walk away. Most people spend years trapped by fear. Fear of loneliness, fear of losing someone, fear of starting over, fear of disappointing others, so they stay. They stay in situations that drain them. They stay around people who diminish them. They stay in environments that slowly disconnect them from who they truly are. And every day they remain, they pay a price. A piece of their confidence, a piece of their identity, a piece of their future. The strongest men understand something different. They understand that attachment is not the same thing as commitment. Commitment is a choice. Attachment is dependence. And dependence will convince you to tolerate what your standards should reject. That's why the ability to walk away is so powerful. Not because you're looking for exits, because you're never trapped. You stay because something aligns with your values. You stay because it contributes to your growth. You stay because it brings peace rather than confusion. But the moment it consistently violates those principles, you're prepared to let it go. Even when it's difficult, especially when it's difficult. That kind of self-respect changes everything. It changes how people treat you. It changes what you accept. It changes the opportunities that enter your life. Because your standards become a filter. The wrong people leave, the right people stay. And over time, your life begins reflecting your highest values instead of your deepest fears. This is where all 5 boundaries come together. You stop rewarding disrespect. You protect your peace. You stop giving away every piece of yourself too quickly. You master your reactions. And you remain willing to walk away when necessary. Not out of pride, out of alignment. Because the goal was never to become harder. The goal was never to become detached from life. The goal was to become a man who can love deeply without abandoning himself. A man who can care without becoming dependent. A man who can remain open without becoming vulnerable to every passing storm. And perhaps the most surprising part of this journey is what happens afterward. You stop chasing respect. You stop demanding it. You stop searching for validation in other people. Because the moment you begin honoring your own standards, something shifts internally. You no longer need constant proof of your worth. You know it, quietly, calmly, without announcement. And from that place, relationships become healthier, decisions become clearer, life becomes simpler, not because challenges disappear, but because you've become stronger than the challenges that once controlled you. So if there's one thing to remember, let it be this: the quality of your life will always reflect the quality of the boundaries you refuse to compromise. And somewhere in the future, you'll look back at the moment you finally chose yourself over fear, over approval, over comfort, and realize that was the day everything truly began.